I am so proud of you. You have made it through 7 lessons of baking school. And if you're just jumping in here, make sure you jump back and go watch those 7 lessons if you haven't already. Because some of them might not sound very fun. So we're discussing different types of flours or the tools that you need for baking. But before we can get to really fun classes like making a bomb sandwich loaf or conquering sourdough, you first need to learn baking foundations. This is what most people skip. And believe me, learning these first lessons and learning how to master simple quick breads will give you so many skills for taking on bigger and more complicated baking recipes in the future. So what we're doing is we're laying that groundwork and we're just building step by step. Every new recipe that you take on, you're learning another little skill. You're realizing how the flour is going to interact. You're starting to see the process. You're learning one new skill at a time. And Baking School with Jami operates off the assumption that you learn baking best when you try out just one new recipe a week. So join me each week as we dive into these new topics and bake a recipe every week as we go. Now, as a reminder, before we get into it, you can head over to bakingschoolwithjami.com to access all the printables and recipes for free that go along with each lesson. Every lesson, we're gonna come up with a fantastic, simple recipe for you to do right along with me. So today, watch until the end of the lesson because we're gonna learn how to make rosemary cheddar bread. Now, learning how to make savory quick breads that don't take 2 to 4 hours to make and that you can pair with a quick soup is fantastic because you can throw a soup in the crock pot and you can whip up this quick bread, and by the time that's done, you have got an awesome pairing. So I love savory quick breads for those days where I kind of forgot to throw food together. So you're gonna love this recipe. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to my YouTube channel so that you never miss another episode of Baking School with Jami, because we do have really incredible courses coming right around the corner. All right, hopefully you have been enjoying this journey into baking quick breads. We're really rounding out the corner now. We just have 2 more lessons after this before we get into course number 2. I will have announcements for you soon about it. But once you master some good quick bread recipes, you will never show up empty-handed at a potluck again or not know what to bring to a friend over coffee. And as you master quick breads and we round out this first course, I just want to cover a few additional tips for making you into a baking pro. And honestly, how I've learned like 99% of this is just getting in the kitchen and trying out recipes. So make sure that you are putting into practice, that you're trying out these recipes that we are going over here in baking school. All right, my first tip for you is this whole discussion of, do you measure or do you weigh ingredients? Now, people have some really strong feelings about this. So if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. We can still be friends. It is very common in the baking world to weigh 100% of all of your ingredients. So you're going to get your little kitchen scale out. You're going to measure your flour. You're going to measure your milk. You're measuring everything. I'm sorry, using the wrong words and confusing you. You're weighing everything. You get your scale out. You're going to weigh your flour. You're going to see how many grams it is. You're weighing it instead of putting it in a measuring cup and measuring it. Now, this does make recipes much more precise since flour weights especially can vary wildly. So 1 cup of flour, whether it's sifted or just scooped out, can be 40 grams difference in weight. Spelt flour is a lighter flour compared to others. Like, there's a lot of variations. And so it is actually much more precise to use weight. But I'm gonna be really honest with you right now. There is no way in the world that I am getting my scale out to measure every single ingredient. I am just way too busy, and it has not yielded poor results for me. So let's talk about first time I ever made tortillas. Now, this is a little bit different of an example, but the first couple of times I made tortillas, the recipes and the tutorials I was following told me to cut my dough up into pieces and then weigh each piece to make sure that they were all the same amount, and then add some dough to it if it wasn't. So I did that until I finally realized I don't care if they're slightly different in size. One tortilla can be a little smaller than the next. If it cuts off like 100 hours of me measuring these stupid little balls, I can just like cut them up and go, and I don't mind. So it's absolutely okay if you want to at the beginning, like weigh stuff, do it the precise way. But I also think for a lot of things, especially quick breads, you really just don't need to do that. You can throw in a quick cup of flour. If it feels a little bit too wet, you add a little bit more flour. And that's really what I do, because bread baking is definitely more of an art than a science. There is science involved. There are chemical reactions. But at the end of the day, you have to know what your bread is doing. Like we're going to talk about in a few minutes, your altitude of where you live makes a big difference. The humidity in the air, everything can make a difference. So even when you weigh your ingredients, there's times where you're going to have to just know, what is this supposed to look like? And you only gain that through experience of making recipes, having some fail, and picking up and trying again. So when we get to our sourdough course, I'm going to teach you how to weigh, because there are times where you do need to be very precise. But for quick breads especially, I just don't think it's needed, and I'm not spending my time doing that, okay? So you will tune your eye to different batters. You'll easily be able to see if your batter or dough needs another sprinkle of flour or a dash of milk or water. You're going to develop that eye as you go. So my quick answer is, unless you're doing more advanced bread baking, I don't think you need to weigh it. If you want to weigh and you're less comfortable with me being more creative in the kitchen, being more creative with bread baking, I'm the type that I'll take a recipe and I'm like, I'm gonna change it up and throw some things in. I have friends who are absolutely the exact opposite. They need every single thing spelled out and they're not deviating from that recipe because they just don't feel comfortable. So if you're more that personality, by all means, you totally can weigh it, okay? So my quick answer is, you don't have to, but sometimes for advanced breads, you might want to. So we will get into that in our sourdough course. All right, tip number 2 we're talking about is oven temperature. This is something that I hear from a lot of people, and I was a little bit baffled by when I was first sharing recipes online, because you get used to your oven and the way that your oven functions and the temperature that it takes and how long it's gonna take. And at first I would get comments, not a lot, but every once in a while you get a comment from someone who's like, I had to put it in for double the time and it still was kind of gooey. And I followed your recipe exactly. And I'm like, that's really weird. Like, what is that? But the thing is, it is a known fact that ovens can vary by many degrees from the temperature listed, especially the older that your oven is. So if you're really struggling with baking times, or your items are coming out underdone or overdone, you may want to get a thermometer that you can actually put in the oven to see what your oven is really doing. If it is consistently 10 or 15 degrees lower than it's supposed to be, then you know you can turn your heat up a little bit. If it runs hot, my oven at my last house when we lived in California, it definitely ran hot. It ran on the hot side. And so for when I was first baking in that house, I was like, why is all my stuff done like super fast? This is like where I had to like really have an adjustment period with that oven. So if you have a new oven, if you have an old oven, if you are finding that things aren't turning out right and you suspect it might be your oven, you can get a thermometer that will help you you'll know how to use your oven a little bit better. All right, tip number 3 is converting metric or Celsius. So for my friends watching outside the US, my measurements are not your friend. I understand that. If you need help translating ingredients or oven temperatures, quick Google searches will help. Those of you who are outside the US are probably used to doing that. But I do want to just give you that tip that there are so many online converters all the time. A lot of times will take recipes where I'm like quadrupling the recipe or even sometimes like 8xing the recipe. And so there'll be times where it's like, well, this is easy, but like 2 teaspoons of baking soda. And I'm like, okay, what is that times 8? Which obviously that's an easy one. But sometimes I want to know, okay, so it's 2 teaspoons of baking soda, but I'm timesing it by 8, which is 16 teaspoons of baking soda. There's got to be an easier way. So I will type in 16 teaspoons, 2 cups, and then literally on Google, you don't even have to click on a page. There's an online converter right there for you, which probably a lot of you guys have done. But right there, it'll tell me this is a 4th cup or whatever it is. And so that can be so helpful. Whether you're like, I don't know what Fahrenheit is, I need Celsius for my stove, whatever it is, or you're just trying to like upscale or downscale a recipe, there's really, really handy calculators right in Google. So just type in what you need. You know, type in what is 375 Fahrenheit in Celsius, and it'll literally pop up right there. You don't even have to click on another page. So that's a helpful tip as well and can get you your answers very quickly. The next thing I want to talk about, this is a big one that affects a lot of people, is high altitude baking. All right, our family, a lot of you guys know this, once spent 2 years traveling around the United States full-time in our renovated 32-foot RV. Yes, it was the greatest time of our life. It was amazing. It was also a lot of work. But we spent a beautiful summer in the PNW. We were in the Cascade Mountains. We had a glorious winter in Florida near the beach. We spent the spring trekking across Minnesota and Montana, and we were like this, up and down, and everything in between. And we have been to the lowest place in the US, which is Badwater Basin in Death Valley. And we've also been to the highest peak in the continental US, which is Mount Whitney in California. We have not made it to Alaska yet, so we can't say we've been to the highest point in the United States, which I don't think we'd ever get to the highest point, but you know what I mean. We have stayed for weeks at 7,500 elevation. That's pretty high. And we have spent weeks at sea level. And let me tell you one huge thing. The climate you live in has a drastic effect on your baked goods, especially when we get to yeast and sourdough breads. That's where it's gonna really make a big difference. But your elevation makes a big difference. Your humidity levels, just if it's raining that day, that has an effect on just everything. Like your climate makes a big difference. And when you are entering a different season, you're gonna realize your bread takes longer to rise or it's gonna be shorter to rise. Like there are so many different factors. So one good thing is to learn from people who are baking bread in your local community. Go take a sourdough class from somebody who lives right down the street. You're gonna have quicker, faster results than me showing you who lives maybe in a completely different environment. Doesn't mean you can't learn from people online, but you do need to be aware that this can be a problem. So if you live around 3,000 feet above sea level, in California, we were like 2,500. So we weren't quite at that 3,000 yet. If you live about 3,000 or above, you probably need to adjust your baking times. Now for quick breads, you actually don't have to adjust a whole lot, okay? So if you find your quick breads are not rising well, then what you're gonna wanna, and you live above 3,000, what you wanna do is you wanna add in some additional baking powder. Now, King Arthur, on their website, they have a fabulous chart. Well, they have many charts that help you troubleshoot high altitude baking. So it depends on where you're struggling. It depends on what you're making, and they have different charts. So for their quick bread charts, they have a whole chart that if you're at 3,000 to 4,000 elevation, this is how much baking soda or baking powder to add, and so forth. So if you are struggling, if you are at high altitude, you're having struggle with rising time, then rising, then you definitely want to look at that King Arthur database. And this will also be important when we get into yeast breads and more advanced bread baking. Okay, so those are my tips today to help you turn you into a bread baking pro. Say that 10 times fast. I clearly can't. And now it is time to bake your new favorite recipe that you're absolutely gonna love, which is rosemary cheddar bread. Like this is amazing, and it comes together really quick. So if you head over to bakingschoolwithjami.com, you can download the recipe for today's recipe as well as our past 7 videos of recipes. And then don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss an episode of Baking School with Jami. And I want to ask if you have any other quick bread tips, tricks, or you live in a high altitude and you figured out things that work really well, please comment on this video and share with the class so that we can all learn together, because you guys all have amazing tips and we live in very different areas. So you may have learned and picked up some amazing tips. So please share with the class so that we can all learn together. Today's recipe is a great one to have in your back pocket because it's a quick bread that is savory. We've got cheddar rosemary bread, which is fabulous because you don't have to go through the 1.5 to 2 hour long process of having your yeast bread rise in order to serve it with dinner, with soup. This is something that an hour before dinner you can mix together and serve it with your soup in an hour, which is just fantastic. You know, start to finish, it can be done. It's very, very simple. I am making mine out of whole grain, freshly ground spelt, but you can also use white flour. You can use a Bob's Red Mill gluten-free mix. Whatever you want to do, you can really play with this recipe. It's very forgiving. You're gonna have, somebody snuck a little bite. You're gonna have 2 layers to this. You're gonna make the first is just kind of a regular bread layer. The second is a bread layer that's got a bunch of cheese in it, which is the secret of the beauty of this recipe. And we're going to mix this second layer together, basically the same way that you make the first layer, but then we're just adding that cheese into it, which is, you know, always great. So once we get that mixed together, we will put this second layer then on top, and we're gonna take our knife and go all the way down to the very bottom of your container, but be careful you don't want to scratch your container, your bread pan, and then we're going to swirl it. So here you can see I'm putting that second layer on top with the cheese. I'm kind of pushing it all down. The spelt definitely makes this a thicker batter. If you're using white flour, this might be a little bit more liquidy, that's okay. But you're seeing I'm just kind of going back and forth, trying to really get the layers kind of mixed together to where they're, you know, kind of just all together, and then, oh, there it is, baked. These are absolutely fabulous. Cut them while they're hot, add some fresh butter, or put them in the refrigerator for later. They're amazing.